Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another Victober video. And today, a video I'm very excited to make. Today I thought I would rank all of Charles Dickens' novels from my least favourite to my absolute favourite. So I have actually ranked all of Charles Dickens' novels on my channel before. Back in 2016, so a really long time ago, I made a video series called What the Dickens, where every day for 2 weeks I uploaded an individual book review of a Dickens book in order from my least favourite to my favourite. So I have ranked all of Charles Dickens' finished novels before, but that was quite a while ago, and some of my ranking has changed, and also that is a 2-week video series with very in-depth reviews. So I thought today I would do a much more condensed version and also update my ranking, as some of my Charles Dickens opinions have changed over the last few years, and go from my last least favourite Charles Dickens novel up to my absolute favourite. Today I'm only going to be ranking Charles Dickens' 14 finished full-length novels, so I'm not going to be including The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which is a novel he was writing when he died and he'd only written half of, and I'm not going to be including any of the Christmas novellas such as A Christmas Carol or The Cricket on the Hearth, because they're so short. They're just a bit of a different kettle of fish to all of Dickens' very long chunky novels. So yes, let's properly get into the ranking. At number 14, my least favourite Charles Dickens novel is Oliver Twist. This is just not my favourite Dickens book. This tells the story of a young boy called Oliver Twist who is brought up in the workhouse and then sent out into the world of work, and he is kind of searching for a family to call his own. And we follow him and his interactions with various other characters and all of their plot lines as well. And obviously there is a villain kind of plotting to take Oliver Twist down and stop him from finding out his true parentage. There are some things that I like about Oliver Twist. Mainly, the main thing I like about Oliver Twist is the character of Nancy. Nancy is a wonderful character. Bill Sikes is also a very good character too. He is very compelling and interesting. There are also things that I don't like about Oliver Twist, one of which is Oliver Twist. He is a really dull character for me. I don't think he is a very well-written child at all, which I know I've mentioned on this channel before. In my opinion, Oliver Twist is not a child. He is a man who cries all the time, and that is the only thing about him that supposedly makes him a child, which I find so weird, because in Dickens' later novels and some of the other books I'm going to be talking about today, I think Charles Dickens writes children brilliantly, but in Oliver Twist he doesn't. I also think that Oliver Twist is one of Dickens' most problematic books. There are quite a lot of his books which are a bit problematic in various ways, but I think that Oliver Twist is probably the most problematic. Don't get me wrong, a lot of Victorian literature is problematic, and I've spoken before on this channel about why we have to, you know, look at books within their context and what was acceptable and what was not within their context. But the depiction of Fagin in Oliver Twist is very anti-Semitic, and I find it a bit hard to look past, and it makes for quite uncomfortable reading in some places. Dickens actually received some complaints at the time for his depiction of Fagin, and there is a character in his last novel, Our Mutual Friend, called Mr. Ryer, who is a Jewish man who is incredibly good and kind, and who I would argue is like there as a bit of an apology for Fagin. But I do find Oliver Twist quite problematic. Number 13 on the list has to be Nicholas Nickleby. This is a novel that tells the story of a young man called Nicholas Nickleby. At the beginning of the book, his father dies and he kind of tries to make his way in the world, looking after his mother and his sister Kate. It's quite an episodical narrative. We follow Nicholas in his career as a school teacher, then also when he goes and becomes an actor and gets involved in this theatre troupe, and then onwards and through various different careers that he goes through, and we also follow his sister Kate as well. There are many strong things about Nicholas Nickleby. Ralph Nickleby, who is Nicholas's uncle, who is kind of the villain of the story, is a really strong and interesting character. Smike, who is Nicholas's best friend, I think is a wonderful character and I really, really love. There's also Noon Noggs, a minor character who I adore, but in general Nicholas Nickleby just falls quite flat for me. I still love it, it's still Dickens, it's still written wonderfully, but Nicholas as a character is quite bland, and Kate and all of the rest of the female characters in this book are very bland too. I've mentioned before how I generally find the depiction of female characters in the earlier books by Charles Dickens to be much weaker, and I feel like Nicholas Nickleby is a very good example of this, where the female characters who are present are just really, really dull and don't have much personality and are mainly there to be virtuous and pretty and nothing else. Like I said, there are some great things about Nicholas Nickleby and some wonderful minor characters, but Nicholas falls flat for me, and all of the female female characters in this book are just not so great. Number 12 on this list is Barnaby Rudge. The main reason why Barnaby Rudge is so low in the ranking is because it just doesn't stay with me. In general, Dickens has huge staying power for me, but Barnaby Rudge just hasn't stayed with me. Barnaby Rudge is one of Charles Dickens's historical novels. It is not set at the time it was written. It is set in the 1780s and 90s, and it tells the stories of various characters kind of pulled together around a particular historical event, which were some anti-Catholic riots happening at the time. And we follow various characters who get caught up in this, including Barnaby Rudge. Barnaby Rudge himself is an interesting character and quite a atypical protagonist for a Victorian novel. He has severe learning difficulties, but as well as following him, we follow a lot of other characters around him as well. It's not that I don't like Barnaby Rudge, it's just that it doesn't have the same staying power for me as Dickens's other books. I would like to reread it again. I've read it twice, but even having read it twice, it just hasn't stayed with me like other Dickens books have. Number 11 is the Pickwick Papers. I ummed and ahed about where to put this in the list. I think it was number 12 last time I did a ranking, and it's moved up one place. This is Charles Dickens's first book, and it is quite different from his others. It is very, very episodical, and it tells the stories of various gentlemen who are involved in this club called the Pickwick Club, which was founded by Mr. Pickwick. So it tells the story of Mr. Pickwick, who was kind of man in his late middle age, and various friends of his, and also his manservant Samuel Weller, who is my favourite. He is amazing. And we basically follow Mr. Pickwick and all of his various scrapes he gets into. The reason why Pickwick Papers is fairly low on this list is because the episodical nature just doesn't do it for me in quite the way that all of the weaving plots of Dickens's later novels do. And also it is one of his early books where all of the female characters are pretty terrible and are mostly just there to like faint, cry and look pretty, with one or two like little exceptions. But basically all the interesting characters in this book are male. However, it is higher on this list than it was last time because it is a truly fantastic comic book and it is absolutely hilarious. And I read back earlier this year a book called Death and Mr. Pickwick, which is a modern historical fiction book inspired by the Pickwick Papers, which reminded me how much I do love the Pickwick Papers and just how funny and wonderful it is. And Sam Weller and Mr. Pickwick and the kind of man-servant master relationship between them is just funny. There are just so many wonderful comic moments in this, and that is something I do love about it. At number 10, I have Martin Chuzzlewit. This tells the story of the Chuzzlewit family, who are a very complicated, messy family who have all of these giant family feuds between them. And at the beginning of the book, Martin Chuzzlewit, the elder, calls all of his family around them, including his expected heir, Martin Chuzzlewit Jr., and basically just like says that he hates them all and he's done with all of them. And then we follow lots of different members of the Chuzzlewit family, including young Martin Chuzzlewit, who is sort of our hero, and his kind of efforts to make his fortune, make a way for himself in the world, and make himself worthy of the woman he wants to marry. There are many things that I like about Martin Chuzzlewit. Martin himself is quite an interesting character. He is incredibly infuriating and insufferable in the first half of the book, but he really grows as a character and learns to become quite a lot less arrogant, which I do enjoy. Another thing I like about Martin Chuzzlewit is that a big chunk in the middle of the book takes place in America, and that is really interesting. Just getting that kind of like Victorian perspective of an interpretation of the States is really, really interesting. There are also a lot of wonderful minor characters in Martin Chuzzlewit, including Tom Pinch, who I adore, and including Mary Pecksniff, who is a really, really interesting character and who I sort of see as a precursor for Bella Wilfer, who we'll talk about later. But she's a really interesting female character with really good character development. As I already mentioned, in general, Charles Dickens's earlier novels tend to have less interesting female characters, and I feel like Martin Chuzzlewit is a point where his female characters are still not that strong, but they're getting a much more developed and they're getting much more interesting, and Mary Pecksniff is a really good example of this, where she is a really interesting character and I really, really like her arc. I find it really, really fascinating in Martin Chuzzlewit. At number 9, I have A Tale of Two Cities. It's really hard for me to know where to rank this because I feel like there are books that are above this on my ranking that I think are objectively less good. Like, I think A Tale of Two Cities is objectively one of his best novels, but I'm not sure that I love it as much as some of the others. A Tale of Two Cities is one of Dickens's historical novels. It is set during the French Revolution, partly in London and partly in Paris. We follow a man and his daughter who are French but living in England, and also the daughter's relationship with two very different young men, one French, one English, who are in love with her, and what happens when the French young man kind of gets caught up in events going on across in France in the French Revolution. It is a really, really fascinating novel in terms of the history, both in terms terms of learning about the French Revolution, but also in terms of understanding how like Victorian England thought of the French Revolution. It's also got some wonderful villains in. I think Madame Defarge is a really, really fascinating character where she's sort of a villain, but also you completely understand why she acts as she does. I would also say A Tale of Two Cities just has one of the best endings of any Dickens novels. Like the last few paragraphs, oh my god, the first time I read it, I just wept my eyes out. It's so good, it's so powerful. But I feel like the characterization in A Tale of Two Cities is just not as strong as in some of Dickens's other books. With the exception of Sidney Carton and Madame Defarge, I would say that a lot of the characters in Tale of Two Cities are just not as strong as in some of his other books, and I feel like A Tale of Two Cities is so focused on like the plot and the historical stuff that it's about that the characters are a little bit neglected, and the main female character, our kind of heroine, I don't think is as compelling as many other heroines, especially considering A Tale of Two Cities is one of Dickens's much later books. So while I love it and while I think it's objectively brilliant, I also don't love it quite as much as some of the other Dickens books I love, because characterization is very, very important for me. At number 8, I have The Old Curiosity Shop. This tells the story of a girl called Little Nell and her grandfather, and what happens when they are forced to flee the Old Curiosity Shop where they have lived for a long time because her grandfather is in debt. We follow their travels around the country and all the people they meet as they try to like escape their creditors and build a new life for themselves. But meanwhile, we also follow what's happening with all the people that Little Nell and her grandfather left behind in London, including a really, really fascinating array of characters. I actually in general much prefer the London storylines to Little Nell's storylines around the rest of the country, and the characters in London, including Kit and the Marchioness and the unfortunately named Dick Swiveller, just wonderful characters. Like when I look at The Old Curiosity Shop, I know that objectively A Tale of Two Cities is a better novel than it, but I really love The Old Curiosity Shop because I really love the storylines in London, specifically the storyline of the Marchioness and Dick Swiveller, which is just wonderful. However, I do think that the plotline of Little Nell is a little bit less strong, and I do think that the villain, Mr. Quilp, is intensely problematic in all kinds of ways. So I feel like that drags The Old Curiosity Shop down, but other bits of it like lift it up. It used to be one of my favourite Dickens, and I feel like the more I think about it, the more I see all the problems in it, but I also kind of love it as well. At number 7, I have Hard Times. This has definitely like gone up the rankings. I was surprised when I looked back at how I had ranked Dickens's books last time I did this ranking in 2016, that Hard Times was quite low, where actually I think of it very fondly. Hard Times is set in a northern industrial town called Coketown, which is supposedly modelled on Preston, and it's an industrial novel really that looks at how industry is changing the way people interact with each other and how increasing industrialisation is affecting society, but not just how it's affecting people's like everyday lives and their economic and social circumstances, but also how it's affecting culture and how it's affecting people's mindsets. Dickens is really concerned in Hard Times about the industrialisation of the mind, the worry that increasingly using machinery in everyday life and in work is going to make people more like machines and is going to make people think rationally to the point of excluding emotion and like imagination altogether. Like the very opening of Hard Times, the first few sentences, which is spoken by one of the main characters, is, "Now what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life." And basically the whole point of Hard Times is like unpicking why that is wrong and why you need more than facts in your life. And we follow various different characters. The man who speaks those words is a man called Mr. Gradgrind, who's obsessed with facts, and we follow him and his 2 children, and also some working class characters who work in the town and their relationships and the difficulties in life as well. I really love Hard Times a lot. I think it is quite a different Dickens novel. Even just now, like talking about it, I noticed that I spoke about like the message first rather than the plot or the characters. And I think that is because Hard Times is the most of any Dickens book a kind of social manifesto and a social critique novel. Like all of his books have social criticism in, but this one is the one where I feel like the social critique leads the plot rather than the plot leading the social critique. And that makes it a very, very interesting book, but I also think it makes it quite a different book, and it also means that every now and then some of the plot lines or the characters suffer a little bit, but also I love what it's saying, and I find what it's saying so fascinating, and like it's so historically interesting too, so I also really do love it. But now we're really getting in to the truly amazing best Dickens novels. At number 6, we have Great Expectations. This tells the story of Pip, who is a young man who grows up in a kind of working class environment. He is training to be a blacksmith when suddenly he is told that he has great expectations and that he is going to inherit lots of money and that he should become a gentleman. And so he goes off to London to become a gentleman, and his life changes forever. It is such an amazing book. I don't even know where to start with how many things I love about A Great Expectations. I think when I did my What the Dickens videos, I said that I found Pip slightly annoying at times because he can be a bit frustrating and a bit arrogant. But actually, I think the time I reread Great Expectations in between then and now, I found him less annoying. And there are so many other things that I love about Great Expectations. I think it has wonderful character development. I think it has a brilliant plot. It has brilliant twists. I think it has amazing characterization. You know, both those really well-known, iconic characters like Miss Havisham and Estella, but also Pip himself is really well developed. Joe is a fantastic character. I love Herbert Pocket. Like, there are so many things in this book that are just amazing. It is compelling, it is wonderful, it is atmospheric, it is interesting. It has a brilliant ending. I just think it is fantastic and truly, truly brilliant. At number 5, I have David Copperfield. This one has definitely shot up the rankings since the last time I did What the Dickens. I reread it a couple of years ago and just really, really loved it and remembered how amazing it was. David Copperfield tells the story of David Copperfield from his childhood into his adulthood. In fact, in both David Copperfield and Great Expectations, Dickens wonderfully writes childhood, which just, you know, confuses me all the more over Oliver Twist. But David Copperfield follows David's life. At the beginning of the book, where he is living with his mother and they live a fairly happy life until his mother remarries, and then everything kind of goes wrong. We follow him throughout his life, his school days, him falling in love, his journey to becoming a writer, and everything else that's going on. There are so many things I love about David Copperfield. I think there is wonderful characterization. I really love the kind of retrospective looking back narrative on it. I think it is beautifully written. Like, the writing is just incredible. Absolutely hilarious. It has a fantastic cast of characters. You know, the Peggottys. David himself is a really interesting character. Betsy Trotwood. Betsy Trotwood is amazing. She is so good. Tommy Traddles, he is my favourite. He is the true hero of this book for me. I love him so much. Mr. Dick is fantastic. There are so many characters in David Copperfield which are truly amazing, and I also think the themes in it are really interesting. It's a great coming of age story, and I love as well how it explores class and how David like moves through different classes throughout the book. It's just so good. I highly recommend it. What a novel. At number 4, I have the amazing Bleek House. This tells the story of a court case which has been going on for a really, really, really long time over a disputed will. So we have all these people who are kind of waiting from their inheritance from this court case, Jarndyce and Jarndyce, but haven't got it. And this has kind of gone on generations. And this law case, this disputed will, kind of links together all of the rest of the characters in this book. We follow a whole range of characters. One of our main characters is Esther Summerson, who is employed as a companion to the wards in Jarndyce when they are adopted by a man called Mr. Jarndyce. The wards in Jarndyce, Ada and Richard, are waiting for inheritance from Jarndyce and Jarndyce, and they go to live with Mr. Jarndyce along with Esther. One of the things I really love about Bleak House is that it has a really interesting narrative structure. So like half the novel is Esther's perspective, first person past tense, and the other half of the novel is third person present tense, following lots of different characters connected by this court case, which I really enjoy. It's just something that's really different. It's a fantastic novel in terms of its plot and its themes as well, and the characterization is wonderful throughout. I really, really love it, and I think it's a truly brilliant book, a real masterpiece. Like, some of it is just so moving and so intensely great. And yeah, I just think it's so good, and I really love Bleak House very, very much. At number 3, I have Little Dorrit. This is a truly wonderful Dickens novel that I absolutely love. I'm hoping to reread it quite soon, actually. I have it on audiobook now, and I'm really, really excited because it's been a long time since I reread it, and I just love it a lot. Little Dorrit tells the story of a young woman called Amy Dorrit. She is 22 years old, and she lives in debtor's prison with her father. She is not imprisoned in debtor's prison, but her father is, so she lives there and then goes out during the day to work. Her father can never leave the debtor's prison that he is imprisoned in, but she goes out to work to bring back money and to try and help their family. She works as a seamstress for a woman called Mrs. Clenham, and at the beginning of the novel, Mrs. Clenham's son, Arthur Clenham, comes home and Amy Dorrit and him meet, and everything goes on from there. I love Little Dorrit so much. There are so many things that I love about it. I think Amy Dorrit is a wonderful character. She's one of my absolute favourite characters in all of Dickens. She's really fantastic, really, really interesting, really kind of strong and complex and clever, and I love her family and her family relationships and the complexities of her family relationships. I think there are so many interesting themes going on in the whole of Little Dorrit, and a really, really interesting plot as well. And I would also say that Little Dorrit has my favourite love story in all of Dickens. Little Dorrit is one of those Dickens books where the plot and the premise kind of change significantly halfway through, and the kind of narrative goalposts shift quite a lot, and I really, really like the way that works and the themes that Dickens is able to explore through that shift in the book. I love the way this book looks at gender and class and money. Like, the exploration of like money and economics and business is fantastic in Little Dorrit and really, really wonderful. It's a fantastic book and I highly, highly recommend it. And number 2, we have Dombey and Son. This is a truly wonderful novel that I just absolutely adore. It is so fantastic and I cannot recommend it enough. Dombey and Son is not about Mr. Dombey, and it is not about Mr. Dombey's son. It is about Mr. Dombey's daughter, Florence Dombey. Florence's father, Mr. Dombey, runs a business called Dombey and Son, and because of this business, which is the thing that consumes his mind, he doesn't care about his daughter Florence at all, though he does care about his son Paul, and all he really wants is for his son Paul to inherit the business. Florence, as far as he is concerned, has no business being in the family because she is a girl, but we follow Florence growing up, her relationship with her brother, her very complicated relationship with her father, and with all the other people she meets around her. And it is a truly fantastic book. There are so many things I love about this novel. I think one of the things I love most about Dombey and Son is the way it explores gender. Dickens very, very heavily criticises the kind of Victorian mindset that like male children are more valuable than female children, basically, and criticises Florence's father's behaviour towards Florence and the very difficult childhood and upbringing she has by being considered basically nothing because of her gender. And the way that is explored and the way that Dickens explores other things to do with gender in this book are just fantastic. I mentioned before that I think in some ways this book is kind of set up as a like battle between traditional Victorian femininity and traditional Victorian masculinity, in which traditional femininity is shown to be superior. The gender exploration in this is very, very complicated. I made a whole feminist Victorians video about it, which I'll link down below, because you know, it's kind of nuanced and proto-feminist, but also Dickens is sort of playing with traditional stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. But you know, moving on from that, there are so many amazing characters in Dombey and Son. Florence herself is a fantastic character. I love Solomon Gills and Captain Cuttle. I love Susan Nipper. She is a wonderful character. Mr. Toots is incredible. The character of Edith in this book, she is just one of my favourite characters in all of Dickens. I think she is one of the most interesting female characters in all of Dickens's books. Mr. Dombey himself is a fascinating character too, and so well realised and so complex and interesting. Like, there's just so much in Dombey and Son to love, and I just adore it so much. It also has the scene in all of Dickens I think that's made me cry the most, and it's just so good, and you should read it. You really, really should. I also feel like Dombey and Son is really, really underrated. Do get me wrong, I think Our Mutual Friend, which you all know is the book I'm going to talk about next, is underrated too. But I feel like Our Mutual Friend is one of those Dickens books that not everyone has heard of, but a lot of people who have heard of it, it's their favourite. Whereas I feel like Dombey and Son, I just never hear anyone say how much they love it, and I love it. So, you know, if you love Dombey and Son, tell me please, it is so good. No surprise to anyone who has ever seen like any of my videos before. And number 1 is Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. This is my favourite book of all time. I adore it. It has my heart. Our Mutual Friend tells the story of this fortune and all of the people who are connected by this fortune. A man called Old Mr. Harmon made a lot of money in dust, in rubbish, literally by having like giant piles of dust and sifting through it for anything valuable that had been thrown away. Basically like scrap heaps. He made his money through that. And at the beginning of the book he dies and he leaves his money to his son. His son is coming back from abroad when that same son is found murdered, and so the fortune ends up going to old Mr. Harmon's servants, the Boffins, and we basically follow all of the people who are touched by this fortune. We follow people who are kind of caught up in the Harmon murder and the mystery history surrounding it. We follow the boffins themselves. We follow a woman called Bella Wilfer, who was supposed to marry young Mr. Harmon when he had come back to claim his inheritance. We follow a woman called Lizzie Hexam, who was the woman who, with her father, found the body of drowned young Mr. Harmon in the River Thames. And we follow all of these people connected by the fortune and connected by the River Thames, and it's amazing. There are so many things that I love about Our Mutual Friend. It has some of my favourite characters in all of Dickens in, including Lizzie Hexam and Bella Wilfer, Jenny Wren, Bradley Headstone, Mr. and Mrs. Boffin, Eugene Wrayburn, so many more. There are so many amazing characters in this. I also think the themes of this book are amazing. The way it looks at class and money is just fantastic. The way it looks at love and home and family, the way it looks at work and gender. Like, I genuinely think that Our Mutual Friend has some of the best female characters in all of Dickens in, and has a real appreciation for working women in a way that some of his earlier novels don't, and just think it is truly amazing. Our Mutual Friend was the last book that Dickens finished, and I just think that it is in many ways a culmination of like all of the previous books, and all of the best things of all the previous books are like in here and just so good, and I adore it. Please let me know down in the comments what you think of Dickens and what your favourite Dickens book is, if you have read any Dickens. If you haven't read any Dickens, please do. He's so good and you really need to try him, and he's amazing. And he's not for everyone, and he's a bit long-winded, but he's also wonderful and quirky and just brilliant and fantastic. And yes, I'm very tired. That was a lot of excitement for one video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.